Hello, welcome to the conversation here on News Central Television. This is the show where we bring you all the latest updates and political happenings on the continent. I'm Gbenga Aborowa.
And I'm Rita Omodia, and it's so glad to inform people that we've had the first batch of Nigerians arrive from Ukraine. On our last edition, Wednesday, we talked about the Ukraine-Russia crisis, and we also talked about those Africans who have been stranded at the border. Today, a first batch of Nigerians have arrived from Ukraine. Now, on the program today, we will be looking at the alleged atrocities committed in Ethiopia as UN Commission of Inquiry appoints a former ICC Prosecutor, Fatou Bensouda, to lead probe. Also, the political rivalry in Libya worsened on Thursday as the parliament in the east swore in a new administration, while the incumbent in Tripoli refused to cede power. And of course, we're expecting so much in Libya. I think over time, we've talked about the Libya crisis, political crisis going on in Libya. And now we have two rival groups going on in Libya. But first, we'll start off with situations in Ethiopia, where former International Criminal Court, ICC Chief Prosecutor Fatou Bensouda was appointed on Wednesday to head the UN Commission of Inquiry into alleged human rights violations by all parties to the conflict in Ethiopia. In a statement issued in Geneva, the president of the Human Rights Council, Federico Villegas of Argentina, announced the appointment of the Gambian, as well as two other experts, Kebede Murungi, a lawyer at the High Court of Kenya, and American Stephen Ratner, a law professor who will join the newly created commission.
Now, Fatou Bensouda was the ICC's chief prosecutor from June 2012 to June 2021. The International Commission of Inquiry on Ethiopia that she will lead was established for a period of 1 year. Its mandate is renewable if necessary by Human Rights Council resolution on the 17th of December. Since its outbreak in November 2020, the war, which began in Tigray, northern Ethiopia, and then spread to neighboring regions of Amhara and Afar, has been marked by numerous allegations of abuses on both sides. And joining us this evening on the conversation to discuss this is Kebede, the head of Foreign Affairs Department at Salsay, Weyane, Tigray, Ethiopia, and Dr. David Matsanga, an African Affairs Analyst based in Nairobi, Kenya. A warm welcome to you both, gentlemen. Thanks for joining us on the conversation.
Thank you very much. I am ready for it.
Now, I'd like to start with Dr. Matsanga. What do you make of the appointment of Fatou Bensouda as the head of this United Nations Commission of Inquiry into alleged human rights abuses in Ethiopia?
This is a sad day for the world, a sad day first for the people of Ethiopia and Tigray. Why do I say so? Fatou Bensouda herself is a very serious violator of human rights in Gambia. Two, Fatou Bensouda killed all investigations in Africa in the International Criminal Court. Three, Fatou Bensouda is a total failure in prosecuting anybody on crimes against humanity. Four, Fatou Bensouda is George Soros' surrogate. All the people selected on this committee work with George Soros' Open Society Foundation. Tigray and Ethiopia, I'm sorry. I'm telling you the truth. If you don't protest now, you'll regret later. I might not be there.
These are strong words and accusations against the person of Fatou Bensouda. She's.
Can I tell you, I have evidence. I am the only one in sub-Saharan Africa who has challenged the International Criminal Court, got by the records of ICC.
Please, can you tell us why you think Fatou Bensouda is a failure and why you're against her appointment?
She's a total failure. She was the Minister of Constitutional Affairs and Human Rights in Gambia when Yahya was killing people. Have you put her on trial? How do you take a person who has helped to kill people in another country and bring her to investigate others? That's a total failure. Like I said about Obasanjo, this is a disaster for the people of Tigray. And the earlier they get out and protest and refuse Fatou Bensouda and the other cronies of George Soros, the better. You Tigrayan foreign affairs man, be careful, because you will end up in a very terrible situation.
Thank you, Dr. Matsanga. You've listed about 4 reasons why Fatou Bensouda should not be heading this criminal investigation. But let's hear from Kebede. Do you also feel that Fatou Bensouda is not right for this position?
Well, I am not here to speak about individuals who are leading these investigations, because I don't have the whole information about these individuals. We are still assessing. We are going to assess in a very short period of time, and we will have our own standards. But let me say that Tigrayan especially, because we have been as the hands of exterminators for the last 16, 15 months. We have been demanding for an UN mandated or an internationally recognized body to investigate to all the crimes of genocide in Tigray. So as a one step, we would welcome any international investigation, which does not include any Ethiopian institutions in these investigations. So this is one step ahead, but we cannot comment on individuals based on their past performances or on their ideological standards. We cannot comment for now, but we will look into these allegations by the good friend of our Dr. Matsanga. So this is all I can say for now about these individuals.
Okay.
But as I have been saying, Tigrayans were at the hands of merciless and still are. 1/3 of Tigray is still under occupation. Tigrayans are still starving to death. Tigrayans are still blockaded, besieged, and cut off from the international community, cut off from the outside world. Tigrayans cannot communicate with their families, cannot send the money to their loved ones to save their lives. So the whole Tigray nation as a nation is still on the road to perishing or extermination. So any international initiation should be welcomed. That's what I can say for now.
Okay, over to you, Dr. Matsanga. We know that international humanitarian law provides protections to civilians and other non-combatants from the hazards of armed conflict. What are the basic principles of the laws of war?
First of all, you don't commit genocide. You take prisoners of war and hand them over to an independent organization. Those are regulations of a war. I'm a soldier myself. I fought in the war against Idi Amin in 1977, 78, 79. Most of the people that we captured from Idi Amin, we took them to the Red Cross, including Libyans. But what the Ethiopians have done on this occasion, they have just killed Tigray. I am with this young man in Tigray. I am a friend of Zenawi, the late Zenawi. I'm a friend of all your people. I've been together with all the people. I thought all of them were Ethiopians until I saw them turning against each other. I've been with them in exile in London since 1987. We have worked together. There is one terrorist called Zenawi, Isaias Efaki, across in Eritrea. Why I'm very upset with the UN is that they know very well that Fatou Bensouda flawed all investigations of ICC in Uganda. We got a 0. He went.
Okay, I think we have technical issues with Dr. Matsanga there. I would like to bring in Hailu. Hailu, Ethiopia is a party to core human rights treaties, including the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, and the Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhumane, Disregarding Treatment or Punishment. Do international human rights laws still apply in Ethiopia, even though it's in a state of war? And we have allegations that both sides, both the Tigrayans and the Ethiopian Federal Forces, have committed crimes against humanity and gross human rights violations. What's your take on this, Hailu?
Well, let me correct you first. There are no both sides here. The Tigrayans have been as the hands of occupiers, as the hands of foreign invaders, as the hand of merciless vigilante groups from the southern part of their border from the Amhara region. This has been systematic destruction, systematic rape and gang rape to cleanse the bloodlines of Tigrayans, as they say themselves. So there are no both sides. Yes, there could be some allegations against the Tigrayans who have been advancing into Amhara and Afar regions, but these are allegations at individual level. Whereas the atrocities, the crimes committed against Tigrayans are systematic. They have been planned and pre-planned, premeditated. These have been also acknowledged and endorsed by the higher authorities in the Amhara region, in Ethiopia, and in Eritrea. So please, I would beg you to side on the victim's side. So this both sidism in the international community.
Yeah, but they're documented, sorry to butt in there, they're documented evidence of Tigrayans, the TPLF officials even acknowledged launching rockets on Eritrea's capital, Asmara.
All crimes and accusations and allegations should be investigated. I am on the victim's side.
And I believe that is why the United Nations has constituted.
This both sidism is hurting our feelings, is hurting our, wounds. They are still fresh, they are still ongoing. So this both sidism has its own implications. These systemic crimes that has been committed against the Tigrayans cannot be compared to any allegations against the Tigrayans which may have committed some atrocities in other regions. I cannot guarantee that, but investigations should be allowed. Why is the Ethiopian government not allowing investigations if it is as clean as it claims, or if the Tigrayans are as criminals as they portray them? So the investigations should be allowed, and we will know who are the real perpetrators of all these crimes.
Is the TPLF open, and are they going to be cooperative with the members of this United Nations investigation panel? Are you open to being investigated?
Well, I am an opposition political party. I am not part of the armed struggle, but Tigray and its leaders have welcomed any investigations. So the Ethiopian side should also do the same. This is my stand. Investigations should be held, accountability should follow, and justice must be served.
Okay, all sides open to... Can you hear me, Kebede?
Yes, I can hear you.
You've talked about being open to investigations. While we're still looking at justice being served for all those who have been killed, we also know that the Prime Minister, Alby Ahmed, has said he's open to negotiations and talk for peace. Would you applaud this gesture of his?
Well, I don't see it as a gesture. I see it as a political game, because we didn't saw any development into a political negotiation or settlement of this war. What we are seeing is a continued besiegement of Tigray, a continued blockade of humanitarian aid, a continued disconnected Tigray from the outside world. And in fact, as we are speaking, just earlier today, a drone strike has just hit the Shire city, which is the northwestern Tigray capital. So what we are seeing is a diplomatic game. This is not gesture. If there is any gesture from the Prime Minister, he can start by allowing humanitarian convoys today with a single phone call. He can do that. And if there is another way to show gesture for peace, he can release all the Tigrayans here in Addis and throughout Amhara and Afar regions, which have been languishing in concentration camps now for months. He can release all these former military personnel who are languishing in Ethiopian prison cells for the last 16 months. He can show this political gesture to seek a peaceful resolution to this conflict. But we didn't see that. The
So
only
what concessions
the simplest and the
are
urgent need for the Tigrayanis is
given the
humanitarian aid.
TPLF? I mean, if you ask him that if there are preconditions for negotiations and you feel it would really show that he's really committed to these talks and finding a diplomatic solution to the conflict, and like you said, he should allow humanitarian convoys to pass in to get into Tigray so that they can provide for the most needy there. But what should the Tigrayans do on their side to also show that they're committed to the peace process and negotiations?
The Tigrayans have played their own role, you know. They have been requested, or there was demands from the international community, from the US government, and even from the Ethiopian government that the Tigrayans should withdraw from Amhara and Afar so that there could be any discussions or there could be any possible peaceful settlement for this conflict. The Tigrayans have done that. As of December, early December and late November, they have retreated to their regional borders. These are the demands that has been forwarded by the Ethiopian government themselves. So the Tigrayans have done their fair share. What we are expecting is now the Prime Minister can show some gesture for peace if there is going to be peaceful resolution. The only thing that would not cost him is humanitarian convoys. These are international aid. They are only asking for access to humanitarian aid. They are only asking that they could send medical supplies to these stunting children, starving children, stunting pregnant women, lactating women. People with chronic illness are dying every day in their thousands. People are dying because they are starving.
How are they coping with this halt in humanitarian aid, Kebede?
I'm sorry?
I say, how are Tigrayans able to cope with this halt in humanitarian aid?
Well, I cannot say they are coping because they are dying every day. Tigray predominantly is an agricultural region. 70% of its population lives in the rural areas. These rural areas have their own harvests, but it was, disturbed by the war efforts back in June and May, which are the plowing and seeding times in Tigray. But they have managed the rural area, especially as they have managed up to now. But as of now, they will start dying in their tens of thousands because the regional government, for example, the Social Affairs Bureau, issued a statement that by almost by half of March or by the mid of March, half of the Tigrayan population could perish because of starvation. The most affected for the last months was the urban dwellers, because these were people who used to buy things out of their salaries. For the last 9 months, there is no salary in Tigray for government employees. There is no banking sector. There is no any means of sending money. Even I can't send to my brother. No, I would like to help him, but I can't send him money because there is no way
situation that needs urgent attention. And I guess that's why the United Nations Human Rights Council has come up with this body to send Fatou Bensouda to investigate and serve some justice. Now, Aliu, you did say in your opening remarks that you welcome this development of investigating war crimes and gross human rights abuses. But my question to you is this. Are there precedents of the United Nations Human Rights Council recommending cases of humanitarian abuses to the International Court for prosecution? And have they been successful in serving justice? Because a lot of people look at happenings around the world. They look at the Palestinian and Israeli issue. They look at the United States in Afghanistan and places like Iraq. And justice has not truly been served. So are you hopeful that something positive will come out of this United Nations Commission?
I am not pessimist, but I am not also very hopeful. As you said, these international organizations are driven by their own donors or by their own ideological standards. They have their own issues because, for example, last year, the UN Human Rights Commission, coordinated with the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission while we were opposing to this from the very beginning. We have wrote letters to Ms. Bachelet, but they pursue anyways. But they knew this was bigger than that. This is a series of killing. This is an industrial level of rape and gang rape. This is a very different scenario. This is a genocide after Rwanda, the biggest genocide after Rwanda. So, yes, they have, extended this mandate. They have appointed people, but I am not totally hopeful because this is a big project. This should have been treated above this. This should have been, mandated by UN resolution because we have more than 270 massacre sites. How long would it take to investigate these massacre sites? We have more than 120,000 women who just come forward in this conservative society of our own, who have come forward that they have been raped and gang raped. 3% of these have been deliberately, HIV patients, because this military were also, most of them were HIV positive, so they have, passed this HIV into these women. This is a total destruction of infrastructure, economic structure, so everything in Tigray, health institutions, schools, agricultural institutions, irrigation schemes, water supplies, everything it is destroyed. The biggest industries are all gone. More than 6,000 vehicles have been looted forcefully from Tigrayan households. This is just a different level of atrocity and different level of war crimes. So I am, thankful for the appointment of this team, but I am not still hopeful, totally hopeful. But I am not still pessimist.
Okay, Kebede, now Israel recently announced it would not cooperate with a special commission formed by the United Nations top human rights body to investigate alleged abuses against Palestinians, saying the probe and its chairwoman were unfairly biased against Israel. Meanwhile, the U.S. under President Trump sanctioned ICC officials investigating alleged war crimes committed by U.S. troops in Afghanistan. Now, what is your take on the U.S. involvement and the war going on in Ethiopia?
Well, the U.S. is a superpower. So they have their own interests in this globe. They have interests in Ethiopia. From the very beginning of this war, the Trump administration was in favor of the Ethiopian government. In fact, tolerated the atrocities committed, especially by the Eritreans and the Amhara region forces, because these invading forces were emboldened by the statements of the U.S. State Department, by then the Secretary, Mr. Mike Pompeo, which he accused the TPLF for starting a war in this region. And then there is this ideological fight between the TPLF and the Western countries, because the TPLF is, as Mr. Ambassador Jeffrey Feltman also recently said, a Marxist-Leninist, according to the US government. Yes, we believe as an opposition party also, we accuse them of being as Marxist-Leninist ideologues. But this is bigger than ideology. These are human rights violations. This is a genocide, according to our perspective. This is a genocide. So yes, the US government has interests, and they might, appoint through their influence their own people in such institutions, but we are not against it.
Thank you.
I cannot just comment on individuals who have been appointed on this team.
Thank you, Aliyu.
Yeah.
I'd like to bring in Dr. Matsanga here. The war in Ethiopia has been going on for too long. Thousands have been displaced and thousands killed too. It's been going on for over a year. What are your expectations from the Commission of Inquiry? Do you think justice will be served? And what will it take to bring about lasting peace and reconciliation to the people of Ethiopia?
Thank you very much. Sorry about the power cut off and other installations around Nairobi were cut off. So I don't know whether people did not want me to mention anything about Ethiopia and Tigray, but I am back on using other means of a system. So first, I have no problem. I welcome the UN. It always comes in too late. It does very little. The people in Tigray have been killed. Genocide has been committed in Tigray. The forces of Eritrea, Somalia, Ethiopia, now Turkey, and its allies, those in the Gulf states, have come in and they have killed people. As we speak today, Eritrea continues to kill people of Tigray, and we are not documenting it. Eritrea attacks camps, is attacking camps of refugees. Nobody is condemning it. But the basic thing that they have done so far today, apart from appointing a wrong panel, and I still insist, and I want you to call me back here, sometime after 2, 3, 4 months, just as I predicted on General Obasanjo, that he cannot be peace in that region. I am also predicting now that this committee, this panel, will not bring peace, will actually produce a biased report.
So, Dr. Matsanga, in your opinion, because we're fast running out of time, what will it take to bring about lasting peace to Ethiopia? In less than a minute, please.
Is to sit on table. It's both sides to sit on table. But both sides to sit on table, to be able to sit on table, you must first of all identify war crimes that have been committed, genocide crimes that have been committed. Why most of the conflicts across Africa, like in South Sudan, collapse? The peace process is collapsing because people did not identify and brought people who committed crimes to book. That's why you see South Sudan is still fragile. I agree with anybody. If they don't want to comment on the people, Kenya has done very well in terms of doing what we call silent diplomacy, behind the scenes, to bring both parties on table, which is a very good step towards long-lasting peace. But still, the problems are coming in because of external influence. That external influence, namely Turkey, France, they are already there. They are supplying arms to Ethiopian government under the auspices of the same United Nations Security Council. So what do we do here? The first, we stop the supply of arms. 2, we bring a cessation of hostilities permanently. 3, we call upon the parties to come on table. But to come on table, before you do that, you must account for the crimes committed during the war.
Okay, right. A fine place to live in, Dr. Matsanga. It's always a pleasure having you join us on the program. I'd like to say a very big thank you to Kebede, Head of Foreign Affairs Department at Salsay, Weyane in Tigray. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being a part of the conversation. We do hope that peace comes to Ethiopia as a whole and the suffering of everyone ends really soon. Thank you for being a part of the conversation.
Sorry for the interruption of my
No problem. Thank you, Dr. Matsanga.
Comment on the final question, but if you don't have time, it's okay.
Okay, thank you. You're watching The Conversation on News Central Television. There's a Mexican standoff in Libya. 2 rival groups are claiming to be the Prime Minister. We'll give you details of that and the protracted political situation in Libya when we return from this break. So let's go.
Many thanks for joining us again on The Conversation, where we discuss political stories around the continent. Now, on the first belt, we dealt with the issue going on in Ethiopia, where we have a new commissioner for the International Criminal Court, that is in the person of Fatou Bensouda. And we had our guest, Dr. David Matsanga from Nairobi, Kenya, analyzing the issues. We also had Hailu Kebede, who also talked about how much they want peace to come back to Ethiopia. Now, we'll be looking at the second belt of the program, where we'll be discussing the issues going on in Ethiopia. And according to reports now, we know that the political rivalry in Libya worsened on Thursday as the parliament in the east swore in a new administration, while the incumbent in Tripoli refused to cede power. Addressing the parliament after taking the oath of office, Fatou Bensouda said he was studying all options to take over Tripoli. On the 10th of February, Fatou Bensouda, who was a former Minister of Interior, was selected by the Libyan House of Representatives as Prime Minister.
The incumbent Prime Minister Abdulhamid Al-Beiba heads the Government of National Unity. The Government of National Unity is an interim government that was elected by a UN-backed committee as an interim government to create a roadmap for elections on December 24th. Unfortunately, this did not happen due to disparity in the number of candidates amongst all the issues. These prompted the selection of a new Prime Minister in Fatou Bensouda. Beiba has insisted that the appointment is illegal and he would only hand over when elections are held. One country, two governments. Where does this leave Libya? We have joining us to discuss this on The Conversation today. Dr. David Matsanga is still with us, and we also have Mr. Mustafa Fetouri, a Libyan academic, journalist, and author. One welcome to you, Mr. Fetouri.
With you again.
I'd like to start with you, Mr. Fetouri. Could you please put on your audio? We didn't quite hear you there. Now, Fatou Bensouda has accused Beiba of using force to try to stop his cabinet from reaching Tobruk for the parliamentary session by closing the airspace and seizing 3 of his ministers who tried to travel by land. What do you make of this accusation?
Well, the accusation, as far as I know, and from the information available and contacts with people inside Libya, I'm not in Libya at the moment, it's true. Beiba, not him personally, but he authorized some armed groups who are close to him, especially those controlling parts of the capital, particularly western area where the airport is, to shut the Libyan airspace for about around 24 hours to prevent ministers, incoming ministers, from going to Tobruk to give their oath of office before the parliament. Besides that, at least 2 ministers, incoming ministers from Bashara's government, who attempted to reach Tobruk, which is about 1,000 plus kilometers away from Tripoli, by car. They were held once they reached Misrata, east of Tripoli, about 300 kilometers. When they reached the checkpoint, Misrata checkpoint, they were held by armed groups, and I believe until this moment they are still missing. So it's a fact, unfortunately, and by committing this, it's a very serious crime in Libya's penal code to close the airspace of the country and or cause some kind of delay if the government works, especially in situations of emergency, which is a kind of a situation we have now. Yes.
All right, Professor Fetouri, we know how much of an involvement the United Nations is, and recently they cast doubt on the validity of the Parliament's effort to install Bensouda. It said the vote of confidence fell short of the expected standards. Do you believe so?
No, not really, because what happened, when Mr. Guterres made those comments, he made them after the regular vote of confidence took place inside the parliament with all, noises and shortfalls here and there. But what is important, the quorum was there. I mean, the number of votes required to pass the vote of confidence was there. And then the parliament will further clarify the situation. Yesterday, when the ministers took their oath of office before the parliament meeting in Tobruk, what the speaker did was very clever. He counted the names one by one, announcing them one by one. He was actually directly responding to Mr. Guterres to tell him that, okay, look at that now. If the previous one you had remarks about it as untransparent or whatever, well, this is the most transparent we can do. And he counted something like 92 votes, 92 MPs present there, plus some of the count, I'm sorry, included some who were not there for whatever reason and voted by video link. So that was clarified on the spot, I guess. It took some time, half a day or something, but it was all clear. Yes.
Okay, I'd like to bring in Dr. Matsanga here. Dr. Matsanga, French, okay, staying with you, Professor Fetouri, the French President Emmanuel Macron did say that intervening in Libya was a mistake. And we do see the consequences of that mistake in loss of lives and destruction of infrastructure. Peace has been very far from Libya since the overthrowing of Colonel Muammar Gaddafi. How much trouble is Libya in? And looking at the luxury of hindsight, should the West and NATO and its allies intervened in Libya?
It was a horrendous mistake, actually, and it's not only President Macron of France who recognized the tragedy and the error they have made in 2011. We have heard more or less the similar statements from Italy's previous Prime Minister, Mr. Berlusconi. We have heard something from the ex-president of the United States, Mr. Obama, back in 2016, when he famously said the biggest mistake in his administration was going into Libya. So that's a fact. But the problem is with the West, they are always hypocritical. And while they might recognize a mistake they have made years ago, they never actually do anything to correct it, even later years. So the French, for example, who led the attack against Libya in 2011 and destroyed the country with the help of NATO, of course, they never attempted to help the country out after they helped destroy it and, of course, helped murder Gaddafi himself in October 2011. So does it really count into anything when they say such a thing like this without even regretting it? Not really, no. At the end of the day, Libyans, we are the Libyans who are paying the heavy price every day.
Okay, Professor Fetouri, we see the problems brewing in. Earlier on, several you've talked about this faction coming up, and we've seen how Libya has struggled for peace and security. We also know that the country's resources are another bone of contention, as production was halted at Libya's biggest oil field and protesters threatened to keep a key export terminal closed, even as the Russia-Ukraine crisis deepens. So how much of a trouble is Libya in, and how has the political crisis affected oil production?
Well, the country overall, unfortunately, in a very deep trouble. The solution to which could be quite easy and could be also quite complicated and difficult to reach at the same time. It's a very contradictory situation, and that is because two main things. One, lack of security, which of course brings in the interference from foreign powers, whether regional or international. That complicates the situation among Libyans, prevents actually the foreign interference actually make it difficult for Libyans to sit together and talk their problems through. That's one thing. The second thing, as per your question, for the impact in the oil sector specifically and the economy overall, it's a quite dire situation. We never had, since 2011, we never had, except for a short period of time in 2012, I believe, we never had regular oil production. And oil exports, as you might have known, is the main earner for foreign hard currency for the Libyan economy. The country imports almost everything, especially in terms of food and other machineries and everything else, you could name it. And because of the lack of security, as well as the infighting inside the country itself, always there is a problem with the oil sector. We never reached the full capacity, which is around 1.5 million barrels a day, to compensate for the lost production, lost revenue over the last 10 years or so. We never did that, and it's very unlikely that we will do this. In a matter of a few years. I think it will take a bit longer. Besides, the one serious problem the oil sector is facing in Libya today is not just the problem of security, but also the problem of lack of investment. The sector requires a lot of investment, a lot of oil transporting, as well as gas production equipments, needs replacement, needs renewal, refurbishment, and so on and so forth, especially for the exporting terminals. And that has not been done, mainly because of lack of money. And we have heard the head of the oil company, the national oil company, Mr. Mustafa, talking a number of times about this, because he has never been given the amount of money he requires. And of course, to do any serious refurbishing of the sector itself and the equipment and so on, you have to have security, because you require foreign partners to come in to do the work for you. Libya doesn't have all the expertise in this field that it needs. Yes, please.
Now, Professor Fetouri, just before we wrap things up, looking at the current political climate in Libya, when would be a feasible time for elections? And are elections the silver bullet that will solve all the crisis in Libya if it happens, and Libya elects a government that is accepted by all of Libya?
Well, I take it up from what you have just said. If it happens, according to official documents and official positions, if we like, both of the Parliament and the UN, according to the UN roadmap plan, we should have elections by June. This is what the incumbent current government of Mr. Kebede is saying. They are saying we will organize elections by June. According to the Parliament, who seems to be taking over the whole political process in the country, away even from the United Nations mediator who's on the ground in Libya, elections should take place something after 18 months. That's what they have said about a month ago. And according to this plan, that means there will be no election in 2022. Now, with the new government and Mr. Bashar coming in and hardly taking over, I don't know if it will, I'm quite sure that there will be no election in 2022. And we are lucky if we get the elections in the summer of 2023.
Okay, Bashar, once elected, promised to form a new unity. Talked about how two of them have talked about different dates of the election. Now, judging from his antecedents and recent remarks, can Bashar maneuver his way to unity?
Did you say can Mr. Zinanga?
Yes, Bashar.
Bashar, okay. Well, it's quite difficult to predict, really, because the thing is, especially in the side of Mr. Kebede, who is refusing to give up power and hand over to Mr. Bashar. The problem is he's backed by so many different militias inside the capital, Tripoli itself, and in his hometown, Misrata, which is also the hometown of Bashar. And the problem with those guys is that with those armed militias is they are not always behind the person they are supporting. meaning they do not necessarily obey his orders. If they believe that they should fight, even if he says no, they will go on and fight for whatever reason. So it's a quite delicate balance. And from experience, from past experience, Mr. Bashaga used to be the interim minister in Libya for about 3 years, term before now, the previous government, and he is supposed to have had built up some kind of good relations with those armed militias inside the capital, and who would, well, many of them actually do respect him and obey his orders, but that will not be enough. So it's quite difficult to actually predict what really will happen. I think, in my belief, he will take over at some point, but it's very hard to say when.
Thank you very much, Professor Fetouri. This is where we wrap things up. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, Professor Mustafa Fetouri, as always. Thanks for your insights and your time.
Thank you.
Lots happening in Libya.
A whole lot.
I mean, the situation is so fluid; it changes every other week. And
we see Bebe, on the other hand, saying he would not cede power until there's election, and we see Bashaga saying that he would form a unity government.
And the United Nations is not even being realistic, and trying to force elections. But we'll keep our eyes on the situation in Libya, and also we spoke about the. We did talk about Libya and
Ethiopia also,
Ethiopia
and the war crimes going on there. And we do hope that justice is served and peace is brought back to Ethiopia. This is where we'll draw the curtains for today's edition of The Conversation. I am Rita Omodia. See you again next week.
Bye.